Welcome to Uptown Radio. It's Thursday, March 6th. I'm your host, Caroline McCarthy. On today's show, former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo has entered the mayoral race. New Yorkers weigh in.
So, to be quite honest, I think he's very well qualified.
Major League Baseball is testing out robot umpires.
When it comes to calling balls and strikes, I would probably put my money on a human being over a computer.
Over in New Jersey, the city of Newark will soon select their first poet laureate.
My Newark poem will say that Newark is beautiful, Newark is changing, Newark is now, Newark is forever.
And President Trump has threatened to strip federal funding from universities that allow what he calls illegal protests. Is that legal? We talked to a lawyer to find out. All this and more coming up.
Live from NPR News, I'm Lakshmi Singh. President Trump has signed executive orders that give both Canada and Mexico a nearly month-long break on import tariffs of 25% for goods covered by the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement. NPR's Ada Peralta has more from Mexico City.
Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum said that during a phone call, she walked President Trump through a set of his own government statistics. They showed a huge drop in the amount of fentanyl being seized by border authorities.
Pues cómo vamos a seguir cooperando, colaborando con algo que daña al pueblo de México.
I asked him, how can we continue to collaborate if the U.S. is doing something that hurts the Mexican people? It wasn't a threat, she said. I just asked him to understand my position. Sheinbaum said after a respectful conversation, Trump agreed to pause most of the new tariffs and review it in a month. Sheinbaum had been set to announce retaliatory measures at a mass rally on Sunday. Now she says it will be a celebration. Ada Peralta, NPR News, Mexico City.
Nearly 6,000 fired employees of the U.S. Department of Agriculture have a job again today. An independent federal board ordered them reinstated for 45 days while an investigation into the firings continues. NPR's Andrea Hsu has more on how USDA workers are reacting.
They're not exactly celebrating. I spoke with Michelle Kirchner, an entomologist who was helping alfalfa growers manage pests when she was fired last month, and here's what she said.
I'm feeling kind of yanked around a little bit. I mean, it's good. I'm glad that something is coming out that what happened wasn't correct and was potentially illegal.
But she says it's impossible to have any confidence in what's going to happen in the long term. The Trump administration has made clear it wants to dramatically shrink the federal government. So she thinks maybe they'll all be brought back only to be fired again.
NPR's Andrea Hsu reporting. At least two opposition politicians in Ukraine say they have spoken with the Trump administration about ending the war, but deny that they're strategizing to replace President Volodymyr Zelensky. Here's NPR's Joanna Kakissis.
The news site Politico first reported that senior Trump officials are holding secret talks with Zelensky's opponents as they seek to replace him. One of those opponents, former Prime Minister Yulia Tymoshenko, spoke to NPR in December and said then that she expected Trump to be tough on Russian President Vladimir Putin.
Donald Trump and his team are leaders of the free democratic world, a world that was brought up on the values that we all believe in. They will never be able to accept what Putin is doing.
In statements today, she and former President Petro Poroshenko acknowledged speaking to Trump officials, but said they do not support holding elections until after the war. Joanna Kakissis, NPR News, KU.
Before the close, the NASDAQ was down 2.5%.
For Columbia Radio News, I'm Dana Binfet. For Columbia Radio News, I'm Dana Binfet. Governor Kathy Hochul announced today that $90 million is available to support local roadway safety. This is part of the state's Safe System Plan to reduce fatalities on highways across New York State. Roughly 40% of deaths from car crashes happen when drivers go into other lanes. The funding will go toward infrastructures to reduce the frequency of these kinds of accidents. New York Attorney General Letitia James announced today that her office will recuse itself from the investigation of the correction officers connected to the death of inmate Messiah Nantwi. Nantwi died at Wynn Hospital in Utica on Saturday at age 22. After a preliminary inquiry into his death, the office is now handing over the records for the investigation to the district attorney's office, citing internal conflicts of interest. In the statement released earlier today, the Attorney General said lawyers in their Office of Special Investigations were already defending some of the corrections officers in other cases. President Donald Trump's administration is planning to revoke temporary legal status for 240,000 Ukrainians who fled the conflict with Russia. The move could go into effect as soon as next month in direct opposition to the Biden administration's protections for Ukrainians. Our reporter ZJ Young has more on that later. In other news, Trump's administration was expected to sign an executive order earlier today to dissolve the Department of Education. However, White House officials confirmed he will not sign the executive order immediately and will continue to review the department. Eliminating the education department would greatly impact New York, as the state receives $5.5 billion from the department annually, and more than $3 billion of which goes straight into the state's education budget. Spring weather in the city is right around the corner, with a high today of 54 and a low of 34 degrees, and mainly sunny skies expected for the afternoon. For Columbia Radio News, I'm Dana Binfet.
According to Reuters, the Trump administration has announced a plan to revoke the temporary legal status for almost 250,000 Ukrainians who fled their homes because of war. The move, which reverses former President Joe Biden's policy and support for Ukraine, could happen as soon as next month. Our reporter, ZJ Young, went to the East Village, home to the city's Little Ukraine, to see what residents make of the news.
Linda Justica is walking her dog with a bouquet of pink roses in her hand. She's lived in the neighborhood since the 1970s.
And the neighborhood, everybody was friendly, everybody liked everybody, and it was wonderful. There's wonderful restaurants, all the food was homemade, and it's all over, and it's like the country's in crisis, so what do we do?
There are now more than 270,000 Ukrainian immigrants living in New York City. A majority of them live here in the neighborhood called Little Ukraine. Justica blames some issues in the community, like crime that she has seen over the years, on immigrants.
But people just come here and there are all these mafias, there's the Ukrainian mafia and the Russian mafia and the Chinese mafia and the Italian mafia. They form their cliques and they just start taking everything. And that's the problem.
The Trump administration has often blamed immigrant communities for crime. However, statistically, immigrants commit fewer crimes than native-born Americans. And according to the NYPD, over the last 2 years, crime has dropped in the area. But her view may represent voters that the new administration is trying to appeal to. Trump is also trying to deport Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans with similar protected status. Last week, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky was publicly rebuked by President Trump and Vice President Vance when they met in the White House. Afterwards, Trump paused aid to Ukraine. On the other side of the street, Brother Timothy is on his way to a mass session. He offers religious service to many members in the community. He supports Trump's plans.
I'm half Ukrainian. Ukrainians are very resourceful people. They're smart, they have faith, and the Ukrainian people will find a way to deal with this.
3,532 Ukrainian humanitarian parolees arrived in New York City last year. At Veselka, a popular Ukrainian restaurant a block away, the manager says she doesn't want to talk to a reporter. She's tired of talking about deportation and war. ZJ Young, Columbia Radio News.
On Tuesday, President Donald Trump threatened on Truth Social to remove all federal funding for colleges and universities that allow what he calls illegal protests on campus. The statement says protesters could be arrested, students expelled, and international students deported. That didn't stop protesters from gathering outside Columbia University and Barnard College today.
So under traditional...
I spoke with Martin Reddish. He's a professor of law at Northwestern University, and I asked him whether or not Trump's promise to revoke funding would be legal.
So under traditional constitutional principles, he doesn't have that power. We may be in a brave new world of constitutional law, however. There are things happening in my long career I've never seen, and I don't know where this court's going to come out on these things.
It becomes debatable whether withholding of funds in this case constitutes kind of viewpoint-based discrimination. What is, like you were saying, what is an illegal protest?
Most First Amendment law would be consistent with protests that disrupt normal university activities are prohibited. It is not viewpoint-based. The First Amendment does not protect coercive or threatening expression. It does not protect disruptive expression.
I'm wondering the subjectivity of the word allow, because Colombia, for example, updated security measures, and yet these protests still happen. So is that allowing a protest?
Fair question. The devil's in the details on that one. And I guess by the president's terms, he would be the one that gets the final say on the meaning of that. Even if they can't stop the demonstrations, if no significant punishment to those who participate is handed out, I suppose that could be considered, quote unquote, allowed.
Can you explain to our listeners what it would take under, I'll say, normal standards for him to get the support of Congress on this? What process would that need to go through?
What would normally happen is the order would come from the court, and the president, at the risk of contempt, would obey it. We're running into some questions about whether the president's going to obey those orders. And the only time in our history I remember that being a serious problem was during the Civil War, when President Lincoln ignored a habeas corpus petition signed by Chief Justice Roger Taney. If the president says, I am not bound by court orders enforcing the Constitution, by definition, we no longer have constitutional government.
One more thing I want to look at from this tweet: agitators will be imprisoned and or permanently sent back to the country from which they came. What he's saying is any international student who would take place in this protest would be at risk of deportation, right? Is that your understanding of that as well?
At the very least, that's what it sounds like. The president has substantial discretion in this area. If he were to say, I will ship back anybody who participates in a pro-Palestinian or a pro-anything demonstration, regardless of how peaceful and unobstructive it is, there might be First Amendment implications even for non-citizens. But again, if he's talking about you're involved in an illegal action, I seriously doubt there would be a constitutional problem with the president having authority to ship back anybody who committed a criminal act. And these would be criminal acts.
That was Martin Reddish, a law professor at Northwestern University. Also, quick note, Columbia University oversees Uptown Radio, but our newsroom operates independently. You're listening to Uptown Radio. There's more to come. Stay with us. You're listening to Uptown Radio. I'm your host, Caroline McCarthy. Next up, more on the mayoral race. Former Governor Andrew Cuomo has entered, despite being pushed out as governor after several accusations of sexual harassment. And our day reporter, Joy Ama, is on the ground covering other candidates who are also competing for a spot in the mayoral primary. We also have robot umpires making their way to Major League Baseball spring training. And the city of Newark is getting ready to select their first poet laureate, adding to the city's rich literary history. These stories and more coming up. Former Governor Andrew Cuomo entered the already crowded mayoral race on Sunday. He's already leading in the polls, despite past accusations of sexual harassment and indictment, and understating the death toll in nursing homes during COVID-19. But will these affect how voters feel about him? Una Milliken has more.
When Andrew Cuomo announced his bid for mayor on Sunday, he said New York is in trouble, that crime and homelessness are rampant, and there's an anxiety in the air. In his video announcement, he said he can turn the city around.
I am not saying this is going to be easy. It won't be easy. And I believe I can help. And that is why I announced my candidacy today for mayor of New York City.
In 2021, Cuomo resigned as governor after allegations of misconduct.
We begin with breaking news out of New York, where Governor Andrew Cuomo has resigned just moments ago.
This morning, new allegations of a Cuomo administration cover-up surrounding the handling of nursing home residents infected with COVID.
New York State Governor Andrew Cuomo has responded to a report from independent investigators who conclude he is guilty of sexual harassment.
In his campaign announcement, Cuomo acknowledged these past mistakes.
Did I always do everything right in my years of government service? Of course not.
Some voters may be willing to forgive past accusations. Recent polls show that 66% of New Yorkers feel that the city is heading in the wrong direction. Hank Schenkoff is a political consultant in New York. He says voters are more worried about safety, cost of living, and homelessness than political scandals.
And they're more concerned about that than the criticisms about Andrew Cuomo, quite frankly. That's why he's in the campaign. That's why he has a higher probability of winning right now. And that's frankly why his polling numbers are so good.
On a busy afternoon in Court Square, Queens, people are shopping and sitting on benches taking their lunch breaks. One passerby, Margie Salas, says Cuomo has her vote. She says she just wants good leadership.
I know that he's extremely qualified. I'm extremely happy that he is running.
Salas says she's willing to overlook the accusations of sexual harassment that were made against Cuomo.
You know, whatever you've done in your personal life, it doesn't disqualify you for all the good that you've done. Well, this sucks because I am a woman, right? But having said that, I need to see the proof.
Hiran Roman spoke to me in Spanish through his companion Maria Silver. He says he thinks the allegations against Cuomo are a hoax, orchestrated by Donald Trump.
He always said that. He said Trump created that just to put his name down. He always said that. That's the way I think. He said he don't believe that.
More than anything, Roman says he liked how Cuomo handled the pandemic and stood up to Donald Trump. He also says Cuomo fights for the working class.
Él aportaba mucho a la clase pobre. He supports the poor people and do not afraid to Donald Trump.
But not everyone is hopping aboard the Cuomo train. Richard Bueno says he's undecided, and he doesn't think New Yorkers will forgive Cuomo for his alleged transgressions.
I'm not that confident that he's going to get very far.
Why do you say that?
I think New Yorkers just won't let that go. I don't think he was a bad governor, right? I think he did a relatively good job. But this is politics, and this is the way politics works.
Cuomo faces a diverse group of candidates, including Comptroller Brad Lander, former Comptroller Scott Stringer, and Zohar Mamdani, a progressive assembly member. Hank Schenkoff says the June primary is still a long way off.
So anything can happen. 1 minute in politics is akin to several years in anything else.
Another likely candidate is City Council Speaker Adrienne Adams. She formed a campaign committee last week and is expected to announce her bid soon. Una Milliken, Columbia Radio News.
This mayoral race is already crowded, but there's always room for one more candidate, so long as they get at least 3,750 signatures by April 3rd from voters. That's what's needed to run in the primary. Zellner Myrie is hoping to do that, and is still getting the necessary signatures. Joya Ma talked with Myrie and New Yorkers about the upcoming election.
Last night, Zellner Myrie was on the Upper West Side at the 96th Street subway station asking New Yorkers to help get him on the ballot for mayor.
Good evening. Are you guys registered to vote in New York City? Good evening. Hello. Are you registered to vote in New York City?
For the past 7 years, Myrie has served as state senator representing Brooklyn, and he says he would bring that experience to the new job.
I focused on making our district more safe and our district more affordable. I want to bring that same level of energy, that same level of urgency to the entire city.
A Quinnipiac poll released yesterday has former Governor Andrew Cuomo leading with 30% of voters in the primary. His nearest competitor is Eric Adams with just 10%. Zellner Myrie falls behind, but he says the city is at a crossroad and that, if elected, he would commit to building more housing and ensuring public safety by providing more youth jobs.
The decisions that we make over the next couple of weeks and months are going to have a generational impact. What we do now will matter for many children, many families, both that are here and that want to start their lives here.
Alina Larson is a volunteer helping Myri to gather signatures. How many signatures have you got today?
I'm going to say 15. So,
Not bad.
Not bad.
Larson is a journalist, but she puts her career on hold to support candidates she believes in. And for now, that's Zellner Myri.
He is a lawyer, so I find that he's extremely thoughtful about the policies that he's put forth. Climate, education, affordability, healthcare, all those things are his values, and so that's why I support him.
Nearby, at the turnstiles, John's Jazz Bar asks passers-by for their signatures, pitching Myri as warm, friendly, and smart.
If you go online, and you can see he's passionate about serving his constituents, and I don't think any other candidate is so committed to the people of New York.
Joya Ma, Columbia Radio News. In baseball, the umpire has the final say on whether a player strikes out or not. Now, there's a second umpire being added to the game. It's called the Automated Ball Strike System, or ABS. Major League Baseball is testing this robot umpire at this year's spring training games. And as Hannah Lorenzo reports, many teams, including the New York Yankees and Mets, are now seeing the new computer umpire in action.
The ABS system uses high-speed cameras to call balls and strikes, tracking the exact position of the ball as it crosses the plate. But ABS doesn't replace the human umpire. Instead, teams use the robot as a backup in case a player wants to challenge a call. Major League Baseball recently released a video showing how the automated system worked in a game between the San Diego Padres and Los Angeles Angels. As the video starts, the umpire stands behind the plate and makes his calls as usual. The Padres pitcher Omar Cruz winds up and throws.
Good breaking ball, just misses. Brett Sullivan.
The Padres catcher Brett Sullivan taps his head, the signal that he wants to challenge the call of a ball. Each team is allowed 2 challenges per game. On the giant screens above the stands, a computer rendering of the field appears. A virtual baseball flies from the pitcher's mound, crosses the plate, and veers just to the right and out of the strike zone.
The call is surprisingly correct. 3.
In this case, with the verification of the ABS, the call of a ball stands. Gary Colarusso started umpiring in 2012. Today, he's co-owner of Elite Baseball Umpires Association in Westchester County. He says this robot umpire takes the pressure off the human one.
Because now you're not the one making the decision. It's a computer, so when a grown man argues with you about how could you call that a strike, your answer would be it's not me, it's the robot.
But Colarusso says the ABS system isn't perfect. It can make mistakes.
There's always going to be an error, whether it's human error or a computer error. My Mac screws up sometimes, every now and then. So I think the players, they want the human element involved, but I think when it comes to calling balls and strikes, I would probably put my money on a human being over a computer.
Joe Healy has umpired for 20 years. He's also the owner and president of the Full Count Umpire Association, which trains new umpires to play for local leagues. He says most fans don't realize how tough it is to be an umpire, masked up and standing at the plate.
You could watch a baseball come at your face, then you realize how good these guys are. That is, these umpires are behind the catcher and a ball's coming in at 95 miles an hour at the head, and they're not flinching, they're not blinking.
He says that umpires have to be kind of robotic themselves, focusing on the ball despite the distractions, on and off the field.
Fans are yelling at you all the time. And in the lower levels, the moms and dads are yelling at you, so you kind of taught to ignore everything around you.
Meanwhile, on the mound, Miles Kessler pitches for the New York University baseball team. As a crafty lefty, he says he'll sometimes deliberately aim for the edge of the strike zone.
I kind of strategically place my pitches where they're
potentially called a strike or potentially swung at, but I don't throw it necessarily in the zone all the time. Like I'm trying to paint the edge of the zone effectively and get the hitters off timing. With that, it's really like you have to have finesse with it. Pitching to a real MLB zone with AI, like it would take away from kind of like the art of that craft.
Recently, in a spring training game, the New York Yankees successfully challenged a strike call using the ABS system. But Joe Healy says in most games so far, teams haven't used the system much.
If you look in like the minor leagues last year, those challenges are kind of being saved to the end of the game. So sometimes they're not even being used. If you're at a Yankee Stadium next month and you're watching a game and whoever they're playing, you're not going to see this in the first inning.
For now, teams are getting more familiar with the ABS system on the field. Major League Baseball says it's still not clear whether the robot umpire will make its way to the regular season. After spring training is over, they'll make that call later this month. Hannah Lorenzo, Columbia Radio News.
This month, the city of Newark will elect its first ever poet laureate. Local poets from all over the city have applied for the role, and a selection committee will choose their top candidate to promote the literary arts to Newark residents. As Dana Binfit reports, Newark has long been a center of African American culture and activism.
As far as writers go, Margie Johnson is something of a local celebrity in Newark. She began writing poetry at 8 years old and hasn't stopped since.
I've written lots of poems about Newark.
Johnson goes by the name Mia X. She's an arts educator at Clinton Hill Community Action, and she's a finalist for the role of Newark's first poet laureate. If she gets the job, her role would be writing poetry about the city.
My Newark poem will say that Newark is beautiful, Newark is changing, Newark is now, Newark is forever, Newark is wonderful, Newark is beautiful.
The city is a cultural hub. It's known for its Black arts movement and home to the country's premier poetry festival. But it hasn't always been that way. Mia X was born and raised in Newark and knows that the city has had a difficult history, which means its arts legacy can be easily overlooked.
It just depends on which eyes you're looking out, and you have to make sure that you clean those things out of your eyes.
And the thing that often affects people's view of Newark took place in the 1960s. Samuel Graham Felsen is a literary historian at the Newark Public Library.
So unfortunately, Newark, continues to, I think, be haunted by the history of what happened here in 1967. A lot of folks today call it the Newark Rebellion. I think it's more popularly known outside of Newark as the Newark Riots.
In 1967, residents took to the streets in response to systemic racism and police brutality. The National Guard was called in, buildings were burned to the ground, and 26 people died. The city was shaken and has struggled to recover. The events shaped Newark today, including its art scene. The city's mayor, Ross Baraka, is a politician and a poet. Here he is reading one of his poems at the State of the City address last spring.
Just a kid from Clinton Avenue and 10th Street, a Mary and Amina's son, an activist, a poet, a teacher, with nothing in his hands but a rock and a slingshot.
Here's literary historian Samuel Felsen again.
Newark is not a huge city, but I would argue that it has a huge literary influence.
And Newark is also a big part of pop culture. It's the birthplace of Whitney Houston, Shaquille O'Neal, and Queen Latifah.
So many writers of note come from the city. Stephen Crane, the Red Badge of Courage is from Newark. Paul Auster, who recently died, is from Newark. Allen Ginsberg is from Newark. This is just a city that, I would say punches way above its weight in terms of literature, a city of poets and fiction writers.
There's no word yet on who will be named Newark's first poet laureate, but Mia X is hoping it will be her. Here she is reading her poem, Believe.
You gotta have something to believe in or you'll waste away faster than ice, 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 ice.
Dana Binfet, Columbia Radio News.
Well, that does it for this edition of Uptown Radio. We hope you enjoyed the show. Our foreman today was executive producer Flora Warshaw. Leading our staff of reporters was senior producer Una Milliken. Special thanks to our senior editor Madeline Riley and assistant editor Hannah Weaver. Director Maud Yeesh coordinated studio production with Hannah Lorenzo. Thanks to our newscaster Dana Binfit and our day reporters ZJ Young and Joya Ma. Our instructors Sally Herships, Ben Shapiro, and Priscilla Alabi advised our staff. I'm your host, Caroline McCarthy. Uptown Radio is live on Thursdays at 4. Until next time, you can always find us on uptownradio.org. From all of us here at Uptown Radio, thanks for listening.